Now then, this is not ready yet. It's too soft. I was going to make a mug, but to make a mug that needs to be a lot drier yet. So I'm just going to go and put this outside and then we'll crack on with what I want to talk about. So I'm back. Where were we? Oh yes. Round here in the Fens we are perhaps fortunate in so much as there's not a lot of gravel and stone in the soils. I was amazed when we first came here, 1983, digging down, apart from, especially around the garden, apart from general man detritus and bits of old path and stuff, you got a bit deeper, there's nothing. It's just clay or silt. No stones, no pebbles, no nothing. And it's amazing. Anyway, that is some clay, and it looks like, with that red there, I think we probably need to zoom down a bit. Yeah, with that red there, it looks like rust. So there might be some iron in this. But this was local, about 5 miles away. They dug out a big ditch. There's obviously a ditch that had been, roadside ditch, that had been left for maybe 50 years or something like that. And they finally decided to dig it out good and proper. And they did. They went down a good 6 foot. Well, as I was driving by, you could see this huge pile along the side of this ditch, and the pile was maybe 7 foot high. And I saw the clay. I thought, I've got to have a bit of that, because you can. And it's grey. Now this is the stuff that I've just dug up here, and it's different, right? But, and it's got bits of muck in it, but it polishes. Even as it is, it gives a polished surface. Like that. So that's a good indication there's a lot of clay in that. Okay, and this is the stuff that I was just showing you that I've rolled out, but it's been processed. Okay, now I'll zoom back out again. So we've got this which is dry, this which isn't dry, and we've got this this is just a bit of interest, because this came from Gibraltar Point, which, if you don't know, is a nature reserve. It's on the corner of the North Sea and the Wash, and we were there a few days ago, and there's been a lot of erosion there. It's a bit of a strange thing. They've done a lot of beach enrichment along the coast there above Gibraltar Point, where all the sandy beaches are, pumping vast quantities of sand onto the beach, you know, like 25 foot's worth in height. And of course the sand is slowly, it's slowly moving south with the longshore drift, and there's all sorts of erosion going on at Gibraltar Point. This is sedimentary. Well, what happens is you get a dune forming, and the sea comes round the back of the dune whilst it's forming, and in the back there they end up like these little lagoons. So the sea comes in, and then it sort of goes out, but it leaves deposits there, and it leaves these very fine layers of mud, basically, yeah, and that builds up over time, and then you get a layer of sand, and then you get layers of mud building up, until the point where the sea doesn't go in there anymore. Yeah, so you end up with, let me try and do this, a dune, quite a big dune, and then a flat area of maybe 40 metres or something, and then another dune, and then the coast and the sea. So anyway, there's been some erosion, so on the beach there were these lumps of this stuff here, and I thought, do you know what, it will just be interesting to see what we can do with that. And it's polishing up. Let me zoom in on that a bit more. There we go. You see, it's polishing up without adding water, but I can see little sparkles in it, which of course will be sand. So this sort of shows that, you know, clay can be found in the strangest of places, or maybe it's not strange. Yeah. And the fact that this has got sand in it brings me to this other point, and I've got a lot of this detail from a YouTube channel called Andy Ward's Ancient Pottery, and he's from Arizona, yeah, which of course is right next to New Mexico, and it's very dry there, and he's interested in the ancient pottery from the Native Americans there. Anyway, one of the things he talks about is adding temper, which in this country it can be called grog or what have you, and basically it's non-plastic material that's added to the clay to make it less sticky, and also to make it more robust, so it will handle thermal shock and stuff like that. So I'm imagining that this has already got temper in it because it's got the sand in it. So yeah, just a point of reference, you know, you can find the clay. And clay, like this piece here, this gives you a real good clue because it's hard. I can't break that. I'm trying. No chance. No. So, you know, rather than sort of some soils, which will be, you can't pack them together and they're all loose and they won't coagulate, this stuff really does. So this is the start of a process. So how do you process this clay? Well, again, going on what Andy Ward was saying, was you've got the dry method or the wet method. Now, if your clay has got impurities in it, like bits of stone or a lot of roots and stuff like that, you can chop it up into small little bits like this, and then soak it in water. So put them all in a bucket or a wheelbarrow, as I have done when I'm making the mortar for the kiln, and soak it for 24 hours, right? And then I've used, and Andy Ward had used, a plaster mixer, which is a tool you fit in a battery powered drill, and I'm going to show you that. So you could do that and it makes it into a slurry, and then you can pass that slurry through a flour sieve, something like that, which picks out, and it's surprising how many bits it picks out. And then of course you've got to put that into a tray and leave it somewhere for 3, 4, 5, 6 days, just so that the water evaporates, just occasionally keeping an eye on it. Yeah, so you can do that way, which that's what I'll do with this or this one. Now, he was using what he called a corn grinder, which I imagine is a grinder for grinding up maize. But in amongst the stuff we've got here, we have what's called a mincer, which was used for mincing things up. And it's a sort of similar thing, but the actual cutting head, rather than 2 plates that do this, or circular like that, it's got 4 blades, and against a steel plate with holes in it. So you've got a worm drive that or an auger that brings the material along, then it goes through these 4 blades and then comes out the other end. Well, I tried it with this clay and it works really well. So what I'm going to do now is take you through the various processes. I could wet process this, but I think there are several things to consider. If you grind this, then you can get the resulting fine particles and dust, and you can keep it for as long as you want. You can also weigh it and decide how much temper you want to add to it. Andy Ward reckons 20%. Well, I think that's because he does what's called outdoor firing, which is basically firing your pots in a bonfire. Well, I'm not going to do that, so I was thinking 10%. 10% really fine particles. Sand that's been sifted. So you can mix that together dry, and then when you want to use some, you can mix some up with water and let it stand for 24 hours and perhaps, and supposedly jobs are good 'un. Yeah. With the wet method, when you want to add temper, well, what I've tended to do is go, and I've guessed, because of course you've got the water content and everything, and I'm thinking that weighs about 1 kilo, perhaps a bit less. And I was thinking, yeah, sort of 5 kilos of clay, I would add half a kilo of sand. So just guessing. Yeah, so that's guessing. This is probably more precise because the water content and all sorts of things. But I don't know whether when you're firing in a kiln it makes as much difference. So let's crack on and I'll show you the various processes. So here's the mincer, and this end comes off. And if the one you've got is a bit seized, then just work it out. So there's the plate with all the holes in it, and I think some of these used to have different sized plates with different sized holes, but obviously they've gone walkabout. And that are the blades, the flat side towards the plate, and then in there you can probably see there's an auger which actually feeds in there. There you go, see? So that's easy enough, and I assume that when these get a bit blunt you can just put those on a sander belt or something. Don't sharpen that side, sharpen this flat side, I think. And that is keyed onto the shaft on a square, and then this goes in here, and there's a location pin there. There we go. So that stops this spinning, and then wind that on. Now you could put some lube on there, but considering we're going to be putting clay through this, then I don't think that's a good idea. Now just be careful when you put this ring on, don't cross thread it, or else you're into a world of pain. Okay, there we go. It doesn't fit, so we have to break this up first. So just sweep a smoothish bit of concrete off, because you don't want to introduce bits of gravel and stuff. So break it up. It's not a huge chore. unless you find bending down or kneeling down a problem. There we go. Right, now to the grinder, or the mincer. So we'll just put some of this in there. And it's just feeding through. And there we go. Simples, eh? Apart from you don't want to drop bits in there when you're filling the mincer. And of course, if you do get bits of stone in there, then you'll have to take the front off or wind the handle backwards. If it gets jammed up, just wind the handle backwards to start with, like this, and it will pull everything back. Now, as you will see, this has got its benefits. And its negative points. The negative points is, of course, you've got to wind this handle quite a lot. And it just depends how much clay you're actually wanting to process. If you want to process, let's say, 30 kilos, then I don't think this is the answer. I think the wet method is the answer. And 30 kilos with bits of stone and muck in it, definitely the wet method. It takes longer, as in time. It might take 7 days, but actually the amount of effort you put in is quite minimal. You're letting time do the job for you. But as you can see, this is breaking it up quite well. This is bone dry clay, absolutely. And we're nearly there on that fairly big chunk. And then you can just put this in a bag or a tub. Keep the moisture out, keep it somewhere dry, and then when you want to, well, you can keep it with some temper in it, like say 10% very fine sand that has been sieved, yeah, or you can just keep it as it is, but you need to label it. If it's in a bag or a tub, you need to know what it is and if it's got temper in it or not, because guaranteed you will forget. Especially if you find it 3 or 4 years later. There's a chunk there that's there we go. So that is that big chunk done. And there you go. And of course, when you want to reconstitute this, you look at the label and think, oh, it needs some temper, or it's already got temper. And then you mix some of it up with water, and the various YouTube channels I've seen say mix it up and then let it stand for 24 hours, just for it to, for the moisture to get in amongst all the fine clay particles. So I've just dug some clay, and this is 12.5 kilos of clay, which is about 28 pounds of clay. Don't hold me to that. There is some grey in here, but it is really quite nice stuff, and there is no particles in it. But even if there were, it wouldn't matter. See that grey there? So I'm just going to break this up, and I'm going to separate it out into 2 buckets just to make the processing easier. Because it's fresh dug, it's easy to break up, but you're better off having it in small lumps and picking out any bits of organic matter that you can do. So I'll get back to you in a minute. So I'm back with you. I found one bit of, looks like a bit of bone actually. But now the next thing to do, of course, is to put some water in here. That wants a little bit more. I want plenty in there. And of course, thinking about sustainability with doing it this method or buying it, with this method, okay, it might take a week to process this to get to the point where you can use it. But there's been virtually no energy apart from your own physical body put into it, and that's not a lot anyway. As opposed to ordering it, it's been through an industrial process and then it's travelled from the other side of the country. So that's a huge impact. So just doing it this method has saved a huge amount of carbon. But if you think about it also, you order it now, it might not turn up for a week, in which case this will be ready. So there you go. Sort of self-reliance and low impact living in a nutshell. So I'll put a bit more water in there, and these are going to sit for 24 hours. I might just stir them occasionally, but just as you're walking by, not as a deliberate act, as it were. So most of this process is a minute here and a minute there and a minute there, just as you're doing something else. You just pay attention to it. It doesn't soak up huge amounts of time, it just takes a reasonable amount of time for it to happen. Okay, it's 24 hours. Let's just pick the odd bits of detritus out the top. Here we go. It's a plaster mixer. Right, let's change the camera angle. And as you see, you just keep mixing it until that lot breaks down and you get a thick slurry. So I'll get back to you in a minute. So I've just changed to the Makita drill because there's some slower speeds, and so it doesn't churn. Well, it churns it up, but it's got more torque. So that's not bad. It's like a really thick paint. There's a couple of globs still in the bottom we need to work on, but this one is done, so we'll filter that one. Okay, this is like thick soup. Perhaps it's just a little bit thick. And so we've just got bits of particles and bits of grass and stick and all sorts of things. You know, and you could wash that through again, but I don't think we've got a lack of clay around here. You get the idea. And of course, once I've completed this, then it needs to go into a tray for drying, for slowly evaporating the water off, or letting the clay settle and the water come to the top, and then you can scoop that off. That's the bit that takes the time. So here's the clay settling out. And as you can see, these are two halves of a 25 litre oil drum, the sort of square ones. Anyway, let me come round the other side. So you can see the water has been settling, and got a tin here. Just try and break the surface tension, and we'll just drain some of this water off. We could just let it evaporate. Yeah, it's a bit tricky. There we go. So just I think this is more. Oh yeah, there's a lot more there. But the clay settles, sediments out. It looks a lot more water than it actually is. So we'll just leave this for a few days till it gets to the consistency of thick custard, and then we'll come back to it. So as you can see, this has dried somewhat. Taken various cupfuls of water off the top, and then it's been in the glass house just gently drying. Now this lot, including the container and the water that's in this clay, weighs just over 7 kilos. So I'm going to add half a kilo of sifted sand and then mix it all up. It's easier to mix it when it's in this condition. So we'll mix all this lot up. and just make note of it, that of the total weight, when this is malleable clay, we have got half a kilo of temper in here. I've sort of been trying to get my head around this percentages game, because Andy Ward reckons 20%, but that's when he's giving it open fire firing, no kiln, so there's a lot of thermal stress. Now with my kiln, as you've seen, and if you haven't, I'll put a link at the end of this video, it's not quite so gentle as an electric kiln. And because an electric kiln, say, I don't know, say you've got a 3 kilowatt electric kiln, it will take quite a long time to slowly build up temperature, because you're only putting 3 kilowatts in. Whereas with this wood-fired stove, you can, if you wanted to, put a lot more into it than that. Because the wood's burning, how much wood do you put in it, and all that sort of thing. And there is going to be some modifications to the firebox on that homemade kiln. But there you go. So we've got 7 kilos of chocolate fudge and half a kilo of temper, sifted sand in there. So we can just let that dry some more. I should put a number on the side there, or a letter or something, and then write down what I've done, because you can guarantee in a week or two you go, now how much did I put in here, what did it weigh? Anyway, you can see the process, just mixing that up, and then it'll all settle down. As we've said before, this process, it takes the time, but it doesn't take much of your time. So I tipped one of those square trays out this morning onto this wooden board with a bit of batten all the way around and covered in cloth, and as you can see, it's sort of taking form. Still not dry enough yet, but just move it around and expose the centre. And I think the cloth is quite good because it does wick things up, as it were. So we shall leave it at that, but again, another day or two, depends. Warm but with a breeze will help. At the moment it's warm but absolutely still. But as you can see, you know, I spent 5 minutes today sorting this out. Yeah, maybe I'll turn it over a bit by just pulling the cloth like that. When the cloth wicks the water away, you can just pull it up like that. And another 5 minutes tomorrow and 5 minutes the day after, and I think we'll be there. It's already got half a kilo of temper in it, so once it dries to the point where you can actually handle it, then I shall weigh it again just to make sure we're on the right track. It's nearly there, just a little bit more, just a bit sticky, but if I leave it surrounded by this piece of cloth out in the sun, the cloth wicks away the moisture, and then the moisture is removed from the surface of the cloth and evaporates. That way you don't get little dry patches. So there you go, that's the basic process. And of course, the more water you add, to make sure that it filters easier, then the longer time it will take to evaporate off. So it's a fine balance. But I'm thinking you dig clay in winter and you process it in spring, and of course when it's dry you can store it like this, just in bags, and then process it and dry it, or get it to the right consistency in the drier parts of the year. And I picked up about 100 kilos of this yellow clay yesterday. A friend of mine was digging some footings, and he emailed me and said, "Do you want some clay? How many tons do you want?" Well, 100 kilos will do me, but this yellow stuff, we'll process this, or like 5 kilos of it, something like that, and just see how it does. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and found some inspiration from it. Comments and discussion is always great, and I'll catch up with you very soon. Cheers for now.